Thank you, Joy, and welcome everyone to today's Synergist product demo webinar, Epicore Biosystems, Protecting Workers and Warfighters from Heat Injury with Wearable Technology. I'm Kay Bechtold, Managing Editor of the Synergist, the magazine of AIHA. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today, and especially Epicore Biosystems for sponsoring this webinar. Today's product demo is scheduled for 30 minutes, and we have a lot to cover, so I'm going to dive right in and quickly introduce today's speaker, Jim Ryan. Jim is Chief Revenue Officer of Epicore Biosystems, Editor-in-Chief of the Journal of Business and Artificial Intelligence, and a mentor at the Harvard Innovation Lab. He has a bachelor's degree from Harvard and a master's from Osaka University in Japan. He has spent 30 years building, growing, and operating B2B technology startups around the world. And now I'll turn the presentation over to Jim.
Excellent. Thank you very much for the kind introduction. Hope everyone can see my slide. As mentioned in the introduction, Epicore's mission is to protect workers and warfighters from heat injury using wearable devices. And how do we do that? Well, I'll get into the details, but the top line takeaways about what makes Epicore different as a heat safety wearable. First, we're the only industrial safety wearable that measures individual sweat loss of each individual worker. So we know how much each worker has sweat since the start of their shift. And as we know, sweat rate is highly variable. So Dave may have sweat 8 ounces in the first hour of his shift, and Steve maybe sweat 20 ounces. And we track that individually for each person. We also give real-time haptic hydration alerts. So you can see the device here on the worker's arm. It actually vibrates. So every time you lose 500 milliliters of water, roughly 1 pint of water, it'll vibrate to let you know that you should replenish that right away. And the end result is it keeps you ahead of the dehydration curve. So you don't get into those problems that you have with reduced productivity, with the decline of cognitive and physical skills as dehydration sets in, susceptibility to other types of injuries, and even worse. So I don't think I need to refresh this audience on the effect of heat. You're here because you understand that it's a problem that you have to deal with, that we have to protect our workers from. But I'll just note a few statistics here. So as I mentioned, as people dehydrate, their cognitive abilities, as well as their hand-eye coordination, their strength, muscular strength, begins to decline. And so OSHA estimates that there's 40x more deaths and incidents that are related to heat that aren't reported as heat. And this is because dehydration can cause dizziness and you can fall, or dehydration can cause, as I mentioned, loss of hand-eye coordination. You can crush yourself in a machine. So there's many incidents and accidents that aren't reported as heat related, but are actually caused by heat. And then we know that dehydration just it causes fatigue, tiredness. It reduces your overall productivity hour by hour, day by day. And so the advantages of staying ahead of dehydration are clear in terms of, obviously the financial impact, but also the impact it has on people's health and sometimes even people's lives. So why did we go with an individual approach? There are other ways to estimate somebody's level of heat stress, and there are other devices that do that. For example, you could look at heart rate variability. You could look at skin temperature. You could try to estimate core body temperature. Those are interesting things to look at. But we decided that we wanted to actually measure how much sweat people were losing. And the reason for that is that there's a huge variability in people's sweat rates. Even similarly aged people in similar physical condition, working in the same environment, exposed to the same heat stress, doing the same work, they could be sweating 5-10 times different amounts of sweat. And there's a variety of factors that influence that, from genetics to how much sleep you got to your diet, alcohol consumption, all sorts of things. Acclimatization is a big one. But the upshot is, if you're just looking at things like heart rate and you're trying to estimate heat stress based on population averages, you're going to miss a lot of outliers. And so we decided we wanted to look directly at sweat to develop a device that could tell every individual worker how much fluid they lost, up to that point. And we did it through a fairly simple system. So, it's a small electronic device. There's a patch that sticks to the skin. We recommend applying it to the outer bicep. It can be applied to other locations. And very importantly, you can put PPE over the top of it, right? There's no need to have access to the device throughout the day. Once you put it on, it lets you know through vibration when you have to rehydrate. It's very simple. We also created it without the need for recharging. We'll get into that later. But we wanted to make it as easy to use as possible. You don't have to like pull out a phone and look at an app. It vibrates, you drink water. So as I mentioned, we measure sweat directly. So the sweat actually flows through that adhesive patch and through a sensor on our device. So that's how we're able to be so accurate, because we're actually seeing how much sweat people are losing on a continuous basis. We also measure sodium loss. So some people are very heavy, what we call them salty sweaters. They lose a lot of salt in their sweat. That information is available on the mobile app that is paired to the device. Workers can check that at lunchtime. Maybe they'll see, oh, I lost a lot of sodium this morning. Maybe I'll have a Gatorade or a Squincher or something rather than, just a normal water. So the reason we don't do sodium alerts with the vibrations, there's two reasons. One, we didn't want it to be confusing. We want vibration to be associated just with drinking fluid. But also sodium, you don't tend to get into any kind of acute situation with high sodium loss, over the course of a few hours. So checking it once at lunch and then once at the end of the day on the app is enough. As I mentioned, on-body hydration reminders, what that means is a vibration, right? So you lose 500 milliliters of water, the device vibrates, you drink a bottle of water, you press the button on the device, and it tells it, okay, I've replenished that 500 milliliters. Now, people are people, and some people will ignore the vibration and not take a drink. And if you ignore and you go on to lose 2% of your body weight as fluid, you then get what we call an alarm, the dehydration alarm. And that is a more intense, much longer vibration. And when we do the initial setup with the workers, we can simulate both of those so they learn to understand how that feels. But this one can't be ignored, the alarm. And there's loads of research out there that shows that 2% is kind of that danger zone. 2% is when you start to get at risk of your cognitive skills becoming impaired, severe fatigue, potential cramping, headaches, dizziness, all those things. So in addition to measuring the fluid loss and the electrolyte concentration, we also have two temperature sensors on the device. One senses skin temperature, so it's in contact with the skin, and the other one is on the top of the device measuring ambient temperature. So the advantage to this is, one, we can tell the difference, so we can see what the heat gradient is. Are you net gaining or net losing heat? And the other is, if you have workers wearing PPE, you might want to know how hot it is under that PPE, and this is a great way to keep track of that. The final sensor on the device is an accelerometer that just tells us how vigorously the person is working, because we know more vigorous physical activity is higher risk for dehydration. And we also, all of this information is recorded every 20 seconds, and it goes into the cloud where you can access it. The safety team, the industrial hygienists, you can take a look at it and you can see trends, you can see identify hotspots, and you can feed it back into your heat stress management program. So another thing that differentiates Epicore from some of the other devices you might see out there is we are designed specifically for industrial use. So, we're not a Fitbit or an Apple Watch or, an Oura Ring, one of these things that they're really designed for consumers. So a little bit about the history of the company. Our first products back about 10 years ago were developed in cooperation with Gatorade. They actually became a shareholder. They invested in our company. We created a product for them that they sell under their own brand. It's called the Gatorade GX Sweat Patch. But that's where we did a lot of our initial research into human sweat physiology. And then based on that, about 5 years ago, Chevron came to us and they said, we love the work that you're doing with the Gatorade Sports Science Institute. Can you create a device that does continuous monitoring for an industrial setting to keep industrial workers safe from heat stress and dehydration? And they funded the whole project. They also invested in our company, so they're a shareholder of Epicore. And we worked with them for about 2.5 years, going through different design iterations, putting it out into the field onto Chevron workers, testing it, getting their feedback, improving it. And about 1.5 years ago, we released the final product as a result of that 2.5 year process called Connected Hydration. And just a few of the things that Chevron really helped to guide and to ensure that this product would be bulletproof anywhere you use it. One, had to be intrinsically safe for hazardous locations. So we've achieved that certification. Two, they didn't want to charge a battery. They didn't want to have 1,000 devices, on a site and have to plug in 1,000 devices every night to have them recharged. So our devices actually have a sealed battery that lasts between 1,000 and 1,200 usage hours. So that's, if you consider an 8-hour shift, that's probably an entire summer's worth of use. And then we do the battery swaps when they run low on battery, so you don't have to worry about any of that. A third condition that Chevron gave us is, a lot of our sites don't have internet, or they have only internet like only in the doghouse or only in one part of the site. And so the device had to work independently of any data connection. And so that's how we designed it. The device has its own onboard memory. It stores data locally, and there's no need to have a continuous internet connection. SOC 2 Type 2 compliance was just an absolute must-have, and we are going on now our second year. We've been audited twice. We are fully SOC 2 Type 2 compliant for data security. And then it's got to be able to be used in very hot locations. So in addition to places where the actual air temperature outdoors goes above 50 degrees Celsius, there are also use cases where there's industrial heat involved, heat sources, radiant heat, where it can get even higher. So we tested up to 65 degrees Celsius. So, our feeling is, kind of like the in the New York song, if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. We feel like, if you can satisfy Chevron, you can satisfy just about any use case in the industrial sector. So I mentioned the wearable. You can see here, worn on the bicep. It's completely self-contained, provides the feedback through vibrations. There is an app that workers can use. They don't have to, but if they want more details, or if they want to see their history, or if they want to see the specific amount of water and sodium they've lost, as a number, they can pull out the app. That can be, like I said, they don't have to have the phone with them while they're working, but maybe at lunch or at the end of the shift, they can pull it out, take a quick look and say, oh, I lost a ton of water today. Oh, but I put it all back, because we track every time they drink, we track that as well. Or they might say, oh, I actually ignored a lot of those alerts, and I'm down a couple of quarts, and maybe it's time to, before I go home, grab a big bottle of Gatorade. In addition to the worker app, there's a enterprise cloud reporting portal, and this would be for management, for industrial hygienists, for HSE, anyone who's interested in seeing the current status and also all the historical data collected from all the devices in the field. And we, again, another one of these sort of Chevron, being tested in one of the toughest environments. Chevron said, look, we don't want to be responsible for having access to our employees' health information. And so could you make everything anonymous? And so that's how we designed it. So the cloud, the data that's available by default in the cloud, to management and to the employer, is de-identified. And it's also aggregated. So it's not really possible for you to see the individual name of a person associated with the data collected on their device. And we find that really helps. Workers can sometimes be a little bit concerned when you're talking about putting an electronic device on them. Is it going to track me? Is there a big brother aspect? And the fact that it's fully anonymous really helps to assuage that. Now, we do have an option at the employer's discretion. We can set the cloud up to record identified data if that's a need for you and your employees are okay with that. And we find that this is fairly common in things like fire services, police, public safety, and military applications. Now, the cloud will give you all the data that has been collected by the devices in combination with different environmental statistics that we collect through services. So, the temperature and humidity at each individual site on the day that the data was recorded. And then there's probably 4 dozen built-in reports, and then you can get a data stream if you want to pipe this back into your analytics platform and do your own reporting. That's an option for you as well. And these are just some of those screens that are available to you for historical analysis, current status, things like that. So I guess the real test is, do the workers like it? Does it keep them safe? And, we do surveys usually 4 to 6 weeks after we start putting devices on people. And these are just some of the comments we've gotten. And they do really like it. Everybody found it easy to use. We kept it simple. You feel the vibration, you drink, a 500 milliliter bottle of water. So it couldn't be simpler. But I think, one of the things that's surprising is that, sometimes we'll do a pilot where it's, 6 weeks and then it ends. And we'll actually have workers say, man, I really want to keep it. Because a lot of times people don't realize that they're dehydrated. And if you're constantly dehydrated all day long, every day, day in and day out for weeks and months, it does start to have an effect on your health. You get a lot of headaches, you have a lot less energy. And simply by drinking to the vibrations as opposed to waiting till you're thirsty, which, as we all know, the thirst response just is not really reliable indicator of hydration. It just keeps you ahead of that curve and prevents all these things from happening. So on that note, I mentioned at the top, but it's important to restate the big difference between Epicore and many of the other wearables you'll see out there that are advertising, heat stress prevention, heat injury prevention, is that we're the only one that looks at, really predictive indicators, right? So if you look at the other wearables that are out there, they're looking at heart rate variability, they're looking at temperature, skin temperature, core temperature. By the time your heart rate and your temperature are up, you need to take the rest of the day off, and you may even need an ambulance. So those devices will probably prevent serious incidents, but we decided that we wanted to keep people healthy. We wanted to stay ahead of the curve. And because we're looking directly at sweat loss, and we can tell people, you've lost 500 mils of water, drink a bottle of water, and you'll be back to, to even on your hydration. And keeping them ahead of that is, it's a game changer. In terms of, obviously we're still preventing serious incidents, but we're also keeping people hydrated continuously. And so they don't get any of those, those effects that may not surface as an incident. The loss of productivity, the fatigue, the headaches. We're preventing all of that as well. Everything we do is science-based. Our founding team came from MIT, and then they all worked together at the Sweat Lab at Northwestern University. We've published over 40 peer-reviewed scientific papers on the different aspects of our devices and how they work, and how we measure the accuracy of everything. And I can send a full list of those to anyone who's interested. But yeah, that's really it. We're gonna go into questions next. So yeah, happy to take any questions.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jim. Looks like we have about 8 minutes left for questions. Just a reminder, if you'd like to ask a question, please type it into the chat window on the right side of your screen and send to everyone. The first question we have is, does the device detect actual liquid intake, or does it assume that liquid was consumed when the employee hits the reset button after getting a reminder?
Good question. Yeah. So there's really no way to tell if somebody has drunk fluid. There are some companies working on bottles that have detectors in them. That's probably a kind of overkill and also very difficult. So yeah, we rely on, we tell people press the button when you've had a bottle of water, and that's how we record the liquid intake.
Okay, thanks. The next question I have is, how is your device different from other safety devices?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And I think it really is, our focus is on prevention. So we're looking at sweat as opposed to looking at proxy measures like heart rate or core temperature. And so we're catching dehydration much, much earlier than other devices. And I think the other difference is, as I mentioned, the fact that we developed this device, for Chevron. They paid for the R&D, and they invested in our company. And so, I think we have that pedigree of, the very first version of our product was designed for, one of the most challenging industrial environments that you can have. And they tested us in, across their operations. So not just one particular. So we've been tested on offshore rigs, in, really hot desert basins, pipeline work, confined spaces, refineries. And then since then, we've been, obviously, we launched the product, and, airlines are using us, airport authorities, public safety, manufacturing, mining, logistics. So yeah, I think those are the big differences.
Great, thanks, Jim. The next question I have is, do the devices need to be recharged every day?
Good question. The answer is no. Chevron told us they didn't want to plug in hundreds or thousands of devices every night. So it's got a sealed battery. The battery, we know, will last between 1,000 and 1,200 hours. And so that's, about 140 shifts. So that'll take you through an entire summer and an entire hot season. And then we handle the battery swaps as part of our service.
Okay, great. The next question I have is, how is the 2% fluid loss determined? I guess how or what is the baseline fluid level, how is the baseline fluid level determined? And then how is the 2% loss determined?
Excellent question. Yeah. So when we first set up a device, the employee will just enter their height and weight, as well as I think we collect gender as well. And that the height and weight gives us the ability to extrapolate the fluid loss that we're seeing on the upper arm, which is where the device is worn, to a total fluid loss number. And so that's how we know that, the amount of fluid that we see going through from the arm, and how does that correlate to the total body loss. And similarly with the 2%. So since we know someone's total body weight, then we can tell how much fluid they've lost as a percentage of that.
Great, thank you. Next question I have is, are the devices Class 1 Division 2 certified intrinsically safe?
Yes, that was another Chevron requirement, and since then we've deployed with many offshore. Typically we tend to see the Class 1 Div 2 requirement in refineries anywhere where there could be explosive vapors present. So pipelines, refineries, confined spaces, many drill sites, and then offshore as well. So yeah, we design, these intrinsically safe has to be baked into the design. It's not something you can do afterwards. So from day one, we designed it that way.
Great, thanks. Have another question. Have you encountered any issues with the patch falling off or skin allergic reactions?
Great question. Yeah, so I'll take those in order. Patch falling off is rare. So what can happen is, as long as your skin is dry and clean when you put the patch on, it will stay on. We use a 3M surgical adhesive that is used in hundreds of other products, medical products around the world. So it's a standard adhesive. And it adheres very well. If it's a very humid location and, people just, your skin is essentially never dry because you're always sweating. It sometimes might be hard to get a good seal, in which case we do sell an arm strap that goes over the device and keeps it secure on the arm. And so typically that's not needed, but where you are having issues with patches potentially becoming unstuck, we do have that optional accessory to keep the patch on more securely. In terms of skin allergies, as I mentioned, we're using a 3M adhesive. It's hypoallergenic. It's used in many, many medical products, and there probably hundreds of millions of people have used them around the world. In our experience, we had just one user have a skin reaction. We're not sure whether the reaction was to the adhesive or to the alcohol pad, the swab that we use to clean the skin. And that person, we just had them stop using it. But if somebody does have known skin allergies, we recommend not to use the device. If they have any kind of active skin issues at the site, then also we recommend against it. So if they have dermatitis or eczema or something like that, they probably shouldn't use it. I will say we have a new version of the device coming out in a couple of months that does not require any adhesive patch. Instead, the module sits directly in an armband, and the armband has the fluid collection built into it in a reusable product. So that's also an option.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jim. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. I saw a few more questions come in. Just wanted to let everyone know that we'll be sharing all questions from today's event with Epicore Biosystems. So if we didn't get to your question, please know that we will pass it along. My thanks to Jim Ryan for his presentation, to Epicore Biosystems for sponsoring today's product demo webinar, and to all of our participants. Please join us next week on Tuesday, March 25th for our next Synergist webinar, which will focus on ergonomics. You can register at aij.webvent.tv. Thanks to everyone again, and have a great day.
Thank you.